My name is Elena Cross-Davenport. For 11 years, only half of that name was visible. The other half, the half that mattered, had been working in the dark the entire time. Working, building, documenting, waiting for a night exactly like this one. The Rosewood Mansion on Turtle Creek smelled the way old Dallas money always smells. Cedar, aged leather, and something floral that had been spritzed onto surfaces rather than grown. The ballroom was lit to a specific shade of amber that exists solely to make everyone inside it look more successful than they are. I had been to this room 14 times in the last 6 years. I knew which chair wobbled at table 4. I had requested it deliberately. I had been counting down for 7 months. Longer, if you count from the day I first signed his documents under a name he paid invoices to, but never once thought to place. The Dallas Business Journal was hosting its annual Entrepreneur of the Year ceremony, and every name that mattered in this city's real estate world was pressed into a tuxedo or a floor-length gown, applauding the man at the podium. That man was my husband, William Davenport. He stood up there behind the crystal lectern, looking like exactly what he had trained himself to look like, a self-made titan. Broad-shouldered, silver at the temples, the kind of jaw that reads as authority from the back row of a ballroom. He thanked his team. He thanked his investors. He thanked his vision. I was seated at table 4 for wearing a midnight blue dress I had chosen, specifically because it made me look decorative. I was holding my decorative glass of sparkling water. I was wearing my decorative smile, and I was counting down the minutes. After the ceremony, the crowd dissolved into cocktail hour. William moved through the room like a planet with its own gravitational pull, surrounded by men in well-cut suits who needed something from him. I watched from the perimeter. Claire Ashford appeared at his elbow. 32, his vice president of development. Blonde in the way that takes 2 hours to look effortless. She leaned in to say something, and he touched the small of her back. The way you only touch someone when you have forgotten there are other people in the room. I had known about Claire for 4 months. I had not confronted him. I had not cried or called my sisters. I had observed. And I had documented. William found me at 8:45, right after the dessert course. He sat down beside me, buttoned his jacket, and placed a manila envelopes on the white tablecloth between our dessert plates. He had the expression of a man who considers generosity a performance. He says, "I had the lawyers finalize this last week," he said. "I wanted to do this right, cleanly." I looked at the envelope. I did not touch it. "Open it, Elena." The warmth receded instantly. "Don't make a scene." I opened it. Inside, divorce papers, crisp and still warm from some printer, at a law office I had never heard of. Beneath them lay a settlement agreement and a document titled, "Release of Interest in Business Entities and Covenant. Not to Compete." I turned through the settlement with the steady hands of a woman's who had reviewed thousands of legal documents. Which is to say, without visible emotion and without missing a single word. The offer was an insult dressed as a favor. The family home on Beverly Drive, mortgaged to the hilt, a one-time payment of $100,000. The 10-year-old Audi. Buried in Section 4, Paragraph 3, in a font size that bordered on cruel, was the clause that mattered most. I, Elena Cross-Davenport, hereby relinquish any and all direct or indirect interest in Davenport Capital Partners, Davenport Ridge LLC, and Davenport Commercial Holdings, including any claims arising from managerial contributions, structural development, or intellectual involvement in said entities. Managerial contributions. structural development, intellectual involvement. Very interesting words to choose for a woman they had spent 11 years calling a housewife. I set the papers down. I picked up my water glass, took a slow sip. There is no alimony clause, I said. You signed a prenuptial agreement. His voice was smooth. You know what it says. I know exactly what it says, I replied. I reviewed it. At the time, a small frown crossed his face. He did not pursue that. He gestured toward the release. The business interests are separate from marital property. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I reached into my clutch and took out a pen. It was a thin black roller ball, the same one I had used 7 years ago to sign the founding documents of a consulting firm he had paid invoices to, but never once thought to place. William had given me a Mont Blanc for our anniversary. I had left it in the dresser drawer upstairs. This pen was mine. I uncapped it. I signed his papers with it. Every single page. I signed the release. I signed the settlement. I signed the divorce petition. I dated each one. Then I slid the full stack back across the white tablecloth toward him. William exhaled. It was a long, satisfied breath. The sound of a man completing a task he found tedious. He gathered the papers into the envelope, tucked it inside his jacket, stood up. You are handling this well, he said. I always handle things well, I replied. You just never noticed. He walked away. I watched him place his hand back on Claire Ashford's shoulder. I watched her tilt her head up at him. I finished my sparkling water. I gathered my clutch. I walked out of the Rosewood mansion into the cool October night. He thought I had surrendered. He was right about one thing. I had signed everything he gave me. What he did not know was that I had also read every word. And one of those words was a name that was about to become the most expensive mistake of his life. Let me tell you who I actually am. I graduated summa cum laude from SMU Dedman School of Law 20 years ago. For 4 years after that, I was a corporate transactional attorney in downtown Dallas, specializing in LLC formation, business entity structuring, and regulatory compliance documentation. I was good at it. My mentor, Professor James Kwan, a man who had argued before the Fifth Circuit more times than most attorneys, argue before a county judge, told me I had the sharpest eye for structural vulnerability he had ever seen in a student. He meant that I could look at a business entity the way an engineer looks at a bridge and identify precisely which bolt was going to fail and when. I met William at a charity gala when I was 28, and he was 35. He had a small real estate company, 2 properties, and enormous ambition that significantly outpaced his infrastructure. I fell in love with his energy. Not marrying him, but making myself invisible inside the marriage because he needed me. Invisible. And I had confused accommodation with love. I stopped practicing law the year we married. He told everyone it was because I wanted to focus on the home. The truth was simpler and less flattering. William preferred a wife who was not visibly more competent than he was in any room they entered together. But I never let my bar license lapse. 3 years into the marriage, under my maiden name, I began accepting contract work through a small firm I established quietly. Cross Legal Consulting, LLC. The clients came through Professor Kwan. I worked remotely. I worked at night. I worked under a name my husband paid invoices to without connecting it to the woman across his dinner table. Why would he? To William, all attorneys were interchangeable specialists who handled the tedious legal details so he could focus on the vision. He had been outsourcing the boring little details for years. He had simply never asked who was doing them. In year 5 of our marriage, William was building the foundational LLC structure for what he hoped would eventually become a publicly traded REIT. He needed a transactional attorney. He hired cross-legal consulting. He paid the invoices without scrutiny. He never once connected the name on the letterhead to the woman drinking coffee at the kitchen table the next morning. I want to be very clear about what I did in those documents and why. I did not sabotage anything. Every LLC I structured was legally sound, every operating agreement accurate and enforceable. But I also understood, even then, that I was watching a man build a structure on a foundation that included my professional labor, and that at some point that labor would be erased, just as I was. So I protected myself. In the formations documents for the three of his core entities, Davenport Capital Partners, Davenport Ridge LLC, and Davenport Commercial Holdings, I listed a silent administrative co-registrant. The name was Elena M. Cross, not Elena Davenport. Elena Cross, a name he had been paying for 5 years without once looking at carefully. Those three entities held, as of the night he served me divorce papers, $180 million commercial real estate assets. They were also the three foundational holding companies that his REIT, Davenport Capital REIT, scheduled to go public in 8 days, was built upon entirely. You cannot take a REIT public when there is a disputed co-registrant on its foundational entities. He did not know that yet. 2 days after the gala, the doorbell rang at 9 a.m. I checked the security camera. A woman in a Brunello Cucinelli coat and the precise posture of someone who had spent 40 years in courtrooms stood on my front step. I opened the door. Margaret Davenport was 71 years old, a retired real estate attorney, and William's most effective weapon. She had spent our entire marriage treating me like a competent paralegal. Somehow wandered into the wrong wing of the building. She did not wait for an invitation. She walked into the foyer, removed her leather gloves finger by finger, surveyed the house the way you survey property you intend to liquidate. "Still here," she said. It was not a question. "Good morning, Margaret." I gestured toward the sitting room. "Coffee?" "I'll be brief." She settled into the armchair as if she owned it, which she believed she did. "You signed the papers. Sensible." "But I know your type, Elena. You're already looking for an angle. Some creative interpretation of the prenuptial. Some claim about the house." She tilted her head, eyes sharp. "I am here to tell you personally that there is no angle. William and I designed that agreement with 3 different firms. It is watertight." I sat down across from her and poured 2 cups of coffee without being asked. I needed her comfortable. I needed her talking. "I understand the prenuptial is solid," I said pleasantly. "I have no intention of challenging it." I handed her the cup. I was curious about something else, actually. Which of the 3 holding companies does William plan to fold into the REIT structure first? The Capital Partners entity or one of the Ridge subsidiaries? A brief pause. Something shifted in her expression. Not alarm. Not yet. Just the slight recalibration of a woman who had not expected that specific question. She smiled. "I don't see how that's relevant to your situation." But the smile had told me everything I needed. She had no idea there was a problem with the holding companies. Which meant William had not told her. Which meant he was hiding the co-registrant issue from even the person he trusted most. "Of course not," I said. "I was just curious." Margaret set her cup down and leaned forward. Her voice dropped to the register she had spent a career using to deliver bad news to opposing counsel. "Let me be direct, Elena. You had 11 years. You lived very well. You signed the papers. The chapter is closed. Whatever you think you know about this family's business." She let the sentence sit, unfinished, sharp-edged. I would encourage you to think very carefully before you do anything with it. She stood up, replaced her gloves, and walked toward the door. The chapter is closed, she repeated from the threshold. Then she left. I noticed the voice recorder on my phone, which had been running since she walked in, and saved the file. Then I called Professor Kwan. She confirmed it, I told him. She doesn't know about the co-registrant entry. William is managing the REIT preparation without disclosing it to anyone close to him. He is counting on the filing going through before anyone looks closely. James Kwan was quiet for a moment. Then, pull the prospectus. I already had it. I had downloaded it from the SEC's Edgar filing system the afternoon of the gala. The ownership disclosure section listed Williams as the sole owner, 100%, of all 3 foundational entities. My name was nowhere in the document. The IPO roadshow begins in Titus, I said. The SEC filing window for material corrections closes in 5. I have, if I am being precise, 96 hours to establish the co-registrant dispute on the public record before that window closes and the false disclosure becomes effectively permanent. Then you have 96 hours, James said. I looked at the signed divorce papers on my desk. The pen I had used to sign them was beside them. The thin black rollerball, the one from Cross Legal Consulting's first contract. I picked it up. I'm calling Thomas, I said. There was a pause. Thomas Cross was my older brother and a federal prosecutor with the Department of Justice, Northern District of Texas. I had kept him out of the details of my marriage, partly to protect his professional position, and partly because I was not ready to admit to the most principled person. I knew how badly I had miscalculated the man I married. Are you sure? James asked. 72 hours, I said. I don't have time to be unsure. 58 hours before the correction window closed, my phone received a text from a number I did not recognize. It read, I need to talk to you. I know what he is planning. CA. I set the phone face down. I looked at the window for 30 seconds. Then I typed, when? She suggested that evening. I chose a coffee shop in Uptown, small, anonymous, far from the circles where William had eyes. I arrived 20 minutes early and sat in the corner booth with a clear sight line to the door. Claire Ashford walked in at 7:43. Without the performance of a ballroom, she was younger looking than I remembered and seemed considerably more frightened. She ordered tea she did not drink. I am not here to apologize, she said. I am not here to receive one, I said. She looked at me with the expression of someone who has calculated that honesty is their best remaining option. He told me last week he's restructuring the rate ownership before the IPO, adding me as a 20% stakes holder, a performance equity grant. She reached into her bag and placed a document on the table. He also asked me to sign an amended operating agreement for Davenport Ridge LLC. He said it was a formality. I read the document in 90 seconds. It was not a performance equity grant. It was a substitution document designed to replace the existing co-registrant entry on Davenport Ridge LLC with a new one. My name out, her name in. He was not offering her equity. He was using her signature to try to bury mine before the federal filing window closed. Did he tell you? Psst, I said quietly. That signing this would make you a named party in a federal securities fraud investigation. The color left her face so completely and so quickly that I almost felt sorry for her. She reached into her bag a second time and placed a small silver USB drive on the table. He had me forwarding his legal communications to a personal email account. I read them before I sent them. There is an email chain between William and his securities attorneys. She paused. His attorney flagged the co-registrant issue before the prospectus was filed. William told him to proceed anyway. That was not an oversight. That was willful misrepresentation of a federal securities filing. I picked up the drive. Call a criminal defense attorney first thing tomorrow morning, I told her. Before you go into the office. Before you speak to William. Will I be in trouble? She asked. You did not sign the substitution document, I said, and you are here. I stood up. Those two facts matter. I walked out of the diner with a USB drive in my bag and a thought that would not leave me. He had not just used me. He had used a method. The method was the same every time. Find a capable woman, absorb her work, make her invisible, and then discard her when the visibility became inconvenient. He was still running it, and the method still had 44 hours left to run. I gave Thomas everything that night. The founding LLC documents with my co-registrant signature, the SEC's prospectus with the false ownership disclosure, the email chain from the USB drive showing William's attorney flagging the problem, and William ordering him to proceed, and a 40-page memorandum I had prepared documenting every legal contribution I had made to Davenport Capital, partners from the date of its founding. I also gave him the recording of Margaret. Then I waited. My brother called me at 6:47 a.m. on a Monday. Federal prosecutors with the Department of Justice do not call at 6:47 a.m. to say there is nothing to worry about. We are moving Wednesday, Thomas said. No preamble. 9:45 a.m. Be in the building. He might not let me in, I said. He will have told security. You are a registered co-owner of 3 of the entities that building is mortgaged against, Thomas said. He does not get to decide whether you are admitted to a meeting about them. I let out a breath I had been holding for 31 hours. Thomas, I said. Don't, he said. Wednesday. The offices of Davenport Capital Partners occupied the top 2 floors of a glass tower in the Arts District. I arrived on Wednesday morning at 9:42. I presented my Texas State Bar card to the receptionist and told her I was there on a matter of record affecting the pending Davenport Capital Rate Securities registration. There was a pause. There was another pause. Then I was shown to the main conference room on the 31st floor. William was already there with 2 of his attorneys and his CFO. He was mid-conversation. He had not yet processed what my presence meant. Elena, he said. The word arrived as a question. Good morning. I sat down at the conference table without being invited. I opened my briefcase. I placed the original Davenport Ridge LLC formation documents on the teak surface and pushed them across to him. Beside them, I set the thin black roller ball, uncapped, exactly as it had been on the night he handed me his divorce papers. Page 3, I said, the co-registrant field. William picked up the document. He read the line. Then he read it again. I watched his face change. The way a face changes when a word that has been sitting quietly in a filing cabinet for 7 years suddenly detonates. Cross-legal consulting, he said slowly. The room was very still. Cross-legal consulting, he said again. And I could see the machinery behind his eyes working, connecting the letterhead he had never read, carefully to the woman who had been sitting across from him at dinner for 11 years. His attorney, the one who had built the legal architecture of his entire company. His wife, the same person. You were cross-legal consulting, he said. I said. I had been your attorney for 11 years. I had been your wife for 11 years. You never connected those 2 facts because you never thought to ask who was handling the boring little details. He stared at me. I held his gaze and said it clearly. evenly, loudly enough for both attorneys and the CFO to hear every word. You paid me to build this. You just never asked who I was. I capped the pen. I placed it back in my briefcase. Before he could respond, the conference room door opened. 2 people walked in. One was an SEC enforcement officer. The other was my brother. Thomas Cross, in a professional setting, looks exactly as he has always looked when the moment he is prepared for has finally arrived. Completely, quietly, and without any performance in command. He placed his briefcase on the table beside mine. He looked at William Davenport with the steady assessment of a man who has had this conversation many times and has never once been uncertain how it ends. Mr. Davenport. I am Thomas Cross, Department of Justice, Northern District of Texas. My colleague is from the SEC Enforcement Division. We are here pursuant to a federal warrant authorizing preservation of all records relating to the Davenport Capital REIT prospectus filed on September 14th. We are investigating a material omission in that filing regarding the co-registrant status of the foundational entities. He placed the warrant on the table. William's attorney was immediately on his feet. William barely heard him. He was looking at the formation documents, his company's legal skeleton, drafted in a hand he had been paying for 11 years without once reading the name on the invoices. The IPO, he said. His voice had gone flat. You're going to kill the IPO. The IPO is under formal regulatory hold, the SEC officer said, effective immediately, pending resolution of the co-registrant dispute and the false ownership disclosure. William looked at me. The arrogance was completely gone. What was left underneath it was something I recognized. The face of a mzab who had built something on a foundation he did not understand and who was watching it return to its true state, now that the foundation had decided to stop holding it up. The door opened again. Claire Ashford walked in, pale, holding her purse against her chest. She did not look at William. She looked at the floor. Claire, William said. His voice cracked. Tell them Elena had access to the servers. Tell them. I can't do that. Her voice was very quiet. In the silence of the room, it carried like a verdict. The email where your attorney flagged the co-registrant issue, and the email where you told him to proceed anyway. She looked up at him then, and there was no love in her eyes, only the cold clarity of someone who has just understood the full shape of the trap they nearly walked into. I looked out for myself, William. You taught me that. William turned back to me. One last time. The release, he said. You signed the release. I did, I said, with conditional review notations on every page. The release is also independently void because it was executed in the context of a settlement that concealed material assets, specifically the co-registrant interest in all 3 foundational entities. You cannot legally waive rights to assets whose existence was withheld from you at the time of signing. I paused. You know that, William. You have sat across from enough real estate attorneys to understand the principle. The difference is that this time it applies to you. Thomas placed a hand briefly on my shoulder as he passed. It was a small, unremarkable gesture. I felt it. The REIT prospectus was formally withdrawn from SEC review. William's attorneys negotiated a civil settlement on the false disclosure charge, substantial financial penalty, and a 5-year bar from serving as an officer or director of any public company. The DOJ's criminal review was resolved through a deferred prosecution agreement requiring formal acknowledgement of the willful misrepresentation. He knew exactly what he had filed and exactly why. The divorce settlement was vacated. My attorney, Miles Hargrove, submitted a motion supported by the federal record, the co-registrant interest. and one additional item. A home equity line of credit William had taken against Beverly Drive 3 weeks before the gala. $240,000 extracted and transferred to a personal account while he was preparing to give me the debt. The judge used the phrase egregious bad faith twice in her written opinion. The final settlement awarded me the co-registrant equity interest in all 3 foundational entities, $62 million at valuation. It awarded me 11 years of unpaid legal fees from Cross Legal Consulting. It ordered William to retire the mortgages on Beverly Drive and transfer the property to me free and clear. It awarded every dollar of my legal fees. Margaret was informed of the recording from my sitting room 2 days before the family court hearing. She did not appear in the courthouse. I am told she has retained her own counsel. I walked out of the courthouse on a Tuesday afternoon in November. Thomas was waiting at the bottom of the steps, wearing a rain jacket, looking carefully neutral in the way he does when he is trying not to look relieved. "You handled it," he said. "I had good help," I said. He put a hand briefly on my shoulder. It was the most Thomas Cross thing he could possibly have done. 3 months after the settlement, I had a client meeting at the Rosewood Mansion on Turtle Creek. My own client, my own retainer, my own name on the engagement letter, the same cedar and leather, light smell in the lobby, the same sliced in the corridor, the same plush carpet under my heels. But the ballroom to my left was empty this time. No chandeliers lit, no applause, no one distributing trophies for building things they did not build. I stood in the hallway for a moment, and I thought about the woman who had stood in almost this exact spot 9 months ago, holding a decorative glass of sparkling water, wearing a decorative smile, counting down the minutes until something happened to her. She had been waiting. I was no longer that woman. I reactivated my bar registration the week after the settlement. Under my full name, Elena Cross-Davenport, both halves, the half that had been visible and the half that had been working in the dark for 11 years. Both names, because both names belong to me, and I have paid for them with different kinds of work, and I am done allowing either one of them to disappear. William wanted to erase me. He wanted to stand in a glass tower built on my labor and tell the world he built it alone. He wanted to seal 11 years of my professional life under an NDA and $100,000 and a mortgaged house. But you cannot erase what you never understood. And he had never understood the name on these invoices. He spent 11 years paying my invoices. He never once read the name on them. Thank you for listening. I spent 11 years being invisible in someone else's story. I have been telling my own story for 4 months now as recent, and I have learned one thing. The women who carry the most weight are almost always the ones standing quietly at the edge of the room, working, documenting, waiting. If you have met someone like that, or if you are someone like that, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you are watching from. I want to know how far a quiet woman's story can travel. If this story found you at the right time, subscribe to The Revenge with Her channel and hit the bell. Every one of them is true. Every one of them belongs to a woman who was told she did not understand the complexities. She understood. She was just waiting for the right moment to say so.